Monday morning with one of our favorite panelists. Let me introduce the morning and then we will jump right into everything we're going to talk about. I'm Susie Dominic, the president of the Children's Media Association. I'd like to make a quick shout out to all of our members that are joining us today. We appreciate you guys and we love creating all this wonderful content so we can all learn and grow together. We are the only industry organization that works across all media verticals in the kids and family space. Collectively and individually, we seek to inspire industry excellence. We understand the privilege and the responsibility we share as the creative community, shaping the minds and hearts of our children and thereby our future. If you don't know, CMA is a nonprofit volunteer-run organization, and we're always looking for members to get involved and join our global or regional teams. If you're interested, please do reach out through our website. There's a link, and you can just fill out the form and let us know what you're interested in. But let's get going. We once again have the beloved Dr. Amanda Guma for our Dr. Amanda Guma Presents series. Dr. Amanda Guma is the CEO of the research consultancy Fundamentally Children and Dr. Guma's Good Play Guide to discuss different ways children's media can contribute to healthy child development. And I am going to put a quick plug for the next one we're going to do because Dr. Guma does this incredible play guide and we're going to do a panel with her in about a month for the holiday. So we will be coming back to you in November with that one. But let's jump in. We've got the presentation to the right here. So I think it would be good if you just sort of set the stage and then we'll let you flow from there. As always, we're open to questions. So if you want to ask Dr. Guma anything, please put it in the questions on LinkedIn or on StreamYard, and we will funnel them through to her throughout the presentation. And from there, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Susie. Lovely to be back again. I've thoroughly enjoyed these chats that we've had, and I'm hoping that I think this is the third in the series, yep. and I think the others are all still on the CMA website. Is that right? If people enjoy this and want to see what came before it. If you are used to these by now, you'll know there's a sort of a format, and you know that I get very happy when you guys interact a bit with us. So we want this to be a bit more of a conversation and discussion. So please do drop comments on LinkedIn or in the chat. But today we're going to be looking at language and language development and how, as content creators for kids, you can inspire, you can educate, you can promote really good language development in your audiences. So today's session is going to focus on 5 things. So I'm going to do a quick recap of the stages of language development to look at what happens when, because that's more important than you'd imagine. The impact of media on linguistic skills. So what it is that how we as content creators can actually have an impact. We're going to look at its role as a second language learning tool, and my favorite topic always is play. So looking at how play can help promote that language learning, and how we should be involving the parents and what we should be encouraging. Susie, does that sound about right for you?
Yeah, sounds great. I'm excited. As I shared with you, I'm looking to learn this morning too.
So before we move on to the next slide, what I'd like to do is to get you thinking, what are the features in communication and language development? How do we communicate? What do we use? Because it's more than just words. So have a think about what else we use to communicate. I'll give you tone of voice as a starter, but Susie, can you think of any others?
Yeah, facial expressions, hand movements, body movements, like how we convey before we can use words. I see it, having raised 2 kids, I'm always looking at my daughters, even though they speak very well now. And what is their body telling me, and maybe different to what their words are telling me too sometimes. So
yeah, that's key, isn't it? When they're lying, because the body language and the words and the eyes don't all match up. Yeah. Okay, so it is a lot more than just words. Did anybody come up with anything other than facial expressions, personal space, environmental factors, accents and dialects. I think we've got the next, we can move on to the next slide we've got here. We've got stance and positioning, visual aids, hand gestures, volume, and the tone of voice. So well done if you got any of those at home. And if you've got anything that isn't on that list, then even better. But I think it's really important to recognise which of these things can be delivered through digital media or print media, and which of these are all about interactive personal interaction. So things like what's going on in the environment around the kids, or what's their facial expressions, or there's a lot of things that are environmental, but actually there are lots of things that we can look to modify, we can look to exploit, we can emphasize and do more of when we're creating media for kids. So that's one of the things that we're going to really dig down into a little bit with this session. So the first bit that I want to do is just to make sure we're all on the same page with sort of the framework that we're looking at. So let's start by looking at the stages of language development. And we all know that babies don't start with a language. There is research to say that they can hear in the womb, so that they're already picking up the sound, especially of their mother's voice, and those people that are often around her. So there is a formation of some neuronal connections even before birth. But if we're looking at the sort of stages of language development from birth, we're looking at cooing is the first one. So this is where children are using their vocal cords, but they're not making any deliberate sounds. They're just opening up their throat and making some sort of cooing noises. We then move on to
noises.
Sorry, or screaming noise. yeah, depending on the day. Yeah. So they move on from the cooing to the babbling, and the babbling is where they are trying to mimic sounds they've heard. So the ba ba ba, ma ma ma, and it may be the first time that you think the baby said mummy or dada or whatever, but it's normally just a repetition of sounds. So they're working out their mouths. They're using their mouth muscles, their tongue muscles, and they're still very very loose. So they're not very controlled, which is why you don't get more than just the kind of hard stop sound. So they wouldn't make any of the blended sounds at that point. So fluh or thuh or anything like that. It's all very very much a sort of hard stop sounds. And then once they've got that mastered, and they can, at this age, they can understand a lot more than they can say. So a lot of the times you get toddler tantrums because there's a mismatch between children's ability to communicate versus their ability to understand. So they know what they want to say, they just can't quite get it out yet, which is a real source of frustration for them, understandably. Then they move on to one-word utterances. So those kind of me, no, more, yes, now kind of words. They tend to be focused on nouns. So children, when they're very little, will focus on concrete, tangible things, and they're the words they tend to learn most, or most easily. So concrete nouns, one words that can be quite instructive or questioning. So I think that's sort of that stage, and then they move on to sort of two words and phrases. So by the time children are preschool, they are able to communicate in fully grammatical sentences. But if we break that down a little bit further, this next table shows you the kind of the general progression. And I deliberately didn't put this first because I'm a big believer in children learn at different rates. So these are very much guidelines in terms of the age. It's not a set thing. Children learn in the same order, but they don't learn at the same rate. So take these ages as a bit of as a very rough guideline. But as they get into that kind of one word, two word sentence stage, mini sentences, that's when they're starting to learn the rules of language, and they will pick up accents, they will pick up grammar rules. So you often get cute little toddler utterances. So getting things wrong, like putting an ed on the end of everything. So instead of I went, it would be I goed. And they understand certain rules and then they misapply them. So one of my favorite ones from my own children when they were little was winding. So it was raining or it was snowing or the sun was shining, and then when the wind was blowing, it was winding, because to her that made complete sense, which I still remind her of now, and she hates it. But those kind of misappropriating those rules happens, just as they're learning that sort of how grammar and sentences work. So you get there, and by the time kids are sort of 3 or 4, most kids have got that sort of sentence structure right. They know, depending on which language you're learning, as to whether the verb comes before the noun or vice versa, and all of those kind of things. So those rules are embedded. But language learning doesn't stop there. It's really important that as content creators, we help support language all the way through. And the two biggest skills that need promoting all through childhood is vocabulary. Mm-hmm. Because what we want is for people to be able to communicate effectively, and choosing the right word. Kids who are preschool children have a very blunt vocabulary, so they can it's functional, but it doesn't necessarily allow for nuances, because at 4 or 5, kids' lives are very black and white, and they don't have an awful lot of room for nuance. They, things are either right, they're wrong, they're good, they're bad. They haven't developed cognitively to be able to develop that sense of nuance yet. But as they grow, that vocabulary can give children a massive benefit in being able to communicate effectively and knowledgeably with peers and colleagues. So we want them to get to the point where when they're leaving school, they have a really broad vocabulary that they can access when they need to. One of my favorite stats, and I'm from the UK, so we have snow once or twice a year, and it doesn't really make a big difference. So it's snowing. I believe the Eskimos have 17 different words for snow, because it matters to them whether it's powdery snow, whether it's wet snow, whether it's heavy snow, and because there is they have so much more of an experience with snow, they have so many more descriptive words for it. If you're geeky around this sort of stuff, look at the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis of language learning. And that's the idea, is that if you have the language and you've got the vocabulary for things, you can think about things in a different way. Whereas and I think snow is the perfect example. In Britain, it's cold, it's snowy. That's about as much as we think about it, and maybe we can, get a day off school. If you need to think about something in a slightly more involved, detailed way, having that language, having access to that language is really important. And you don't have to wait until children are older to develop that language. Children, I know preschoolers who are absolutely fascinated by dinosaurs can come up with their really long dinosaur names, and they can know all about the Stegosaurus and the Triceratops and a load of dinosaurs that I've long since forgotten, but they have that ability to learn those languages. So I think we want to make sure that we're not dumbing down language just for the preschoolers, whilst making sure that it's accessible to them because of the age and stage that they're at. So that vocabulary piece is a really interesting focus for content creators, because we want to make sure that we can access children's knowledge and then help them develop those new words that will help them explore things in more detail. And the second function of sorry, Susie, what?
I was just going to say, and how this is not so much media driven, but I think this is a good question to ask, or I feel it might be helpful for folks. How important is it, or how influential is the parent in those two last stages, from the first few words to the sentences? Because, my husband and I made a point to always speak a certain way to our children, so that we didn't talk down to them, as you just shared. And I think that we use big words. They asked what those words meant, and then they tried to incorporate them into their language. So how does the home start to shape things, even beyond how media intersects with their development on language?
Yeah, so massively, absolutely massively. And I think, and we'll come on to this in a bit, but
Okay.
the role for media is really most powerful in families where that doesn't happen.
Okay.
Because I think when you learn from each other, and language is a social activity. So when you've got a family that is talking and explaining and using new language and introducing new concepts and having discussions and talking about how, even learning not to interrupt each other, learning to value other people's point of view, learning to listen, all of those skills that happen within a family, absolutely great. But sadly, there's a lot of families where that doesn't happen as well as we'd like it to. And that's where I think the opportunity is for media to be a real force for good. So I'll come on to some of the research that's talked about that in a bit, if you like. And the other big skill for me is oracy. So just going back a minute to being able to persuade, negotiate, convince, entertain, perform, all of those skills that come with increased language and ability, and understanding how to communicate and pronounce your words and give meaning to your words, and that sort of that richness of communication will help children get jobs. It'll help them win interviews. It'll help them win arguments. It's a really powerful skill. So my message is, just because kids can learn to speak before they're sort of 4 doesn't mean that we should stop nurturing their language development through the media that they are accessing. So it's a hugely powerful thing that we're doing here with kids. So in terms of how media can impact on language development, there's a few ways. So vocabulary we've just talked about, introducing new words, and the advantage of visual media is that you've got pictures to help. So you can put the word triceratops on a big dinosaur, and the kids will learn that that's what that is. You can use the visual cues to help develop that vocabulary, and you can model it. So you can have characters in a narrative talking in a way that allows children to understand new vocabulary through context and sort of the general big picture of the story. So that's really important. Serve and return is one of the best ways that young children learn about language, and it's that pace, I suppose, is the best way to put that. Is I will ask you a question and then I wait, and it's not bang 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 bang. There's a pace and a rhythm to language.
Yeah.
And being able to give kids that sort of serve and return, that opportunity in the space to, even if they don't actually reply, but to know that that's where the gaps is, that's really powerful. So you must see that in some of the kids shows that you've sort of involved with the kind of the way that the narrative is paced and the rhythm of the language.
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely even more so for preschool shows, right? Where they break the fourth wall and they actually talk to the viewer and they wait a moment and then they get a response, that sort of serve return, and then even the interactivity of what they could have said. And the child actually feels heard, you know what I mean? Which I think really creates that stickiness with a preschool show and with preschool characters because they create those pauses within the show.
Yeah, exactly. And the interactivity, I mean, as I said earlier, language is such a social activity. It doesn't matter how many words you know. If you've got nobody to talk to them or to say them to, then kind of what's the point? It's fine for reading, but if language is largely social, so that interactivity is really important as well. So I think media is really strong when it encourages interactivity between the people viewing the show. So not just sort of interactivity between the child and what they're watching, but actually within the people in the room. So co-viewing is incredibly powerful. But yeah, making it interactive, giving children a chance to get up and do something and learn something and repeat something. And yeah, so I think that interactivity is key. And then the other thing that we need to make sure we're doing, and this is where I think I've seen things miss their mark a little bit, is that shared knowledge base. So we need to know, and this is particularly important if you're doing cross-cultural media broadcasting, if you're working for different cultures. I mean, even UK and the US have very different words for certain things, and we need to know that the audience understands that when we say one thing, when you talk about the trunk, we know that it's the boot of a car and not something that's on the end of an elephant's nose. So, it's that kind of shared knowledge is really important. So, developing that language from an acknowledged understanding of where the audience is at, I think is really, really important, because otherwise you miss the audience and they get confused. They can't follow the narrative. They can't follow the themes of the show. So I think that's really important.
Agreed.
And then the last one is the narrative. So making that story and taking the kids on a journey with you, because understanding and creating stories are both a really powerful part of language development. So making sure that there is a sort of a beginning, middle and end, and that you're taking the kids on a journey. And it can be whether it's rhyming or whether it's adventures or whether it's a mystery or whatever it is, that taking the kids and using words that are, all those onomatopoeic words that kids just love getting their teeth around. They're great for building up those kind of that feeling, because as a media, you've got as certainly visual video media, you've got sound effects, you've got visual cues, you can have words on screen, you've got actually quite a lot of rich opportunities to really put some drama and or fun or whatever emotion you're wanting to put into that narrative. And I think that can really help with the language development, because it sort of enthralls the kids.
And can you add some nuance to, like, again, I'm going to use my personal experience. For me, a good language builder for my children was music, because we followed this local kids band and we went and saw them live, which was obviously incredibly engaging, but they wanted to learn every word of every song, you know what I mean? And sing along, as well. And then I think the other one, I'm a big book reader, and obviously my kids didn't really have a choice on that. Like reading stories together and all of that. I think, moving across the mediums, that's kind of a tongue twister there, but using them all at your disposal to help your children. I think that's another thing. And as media makers, creating content that has mixed mediums is something I strive for. So
I think that's really good advice. Yeah, really, really powerful. Absolutely. So if we dig a bit into the science of actually what happens with language learning, you've got encoding and you've got decoding. So and I'll come on to the sort of the brain areas in a minute, just for those of you who are interested. But this is Dad, I guess, talking to the kids. Now he has to think about what he wants to say. He has to encode it in his brain into words that come out of his mouth. And then they have to go into the kids' ears. They have to get decoded by their brain so that they understand what he's saying. And in the middle is all the noise and barriers to communication that mean that, it doesn't happen as effectively as possible. And those barriers, or that noise, can be actual noise. It can be there's a discrepancy between how loud he's talking and how clearly the kids can hear. It could be the Hoover on in the background or whatever, or the washing machine, or it could be that he's misunderstood where they're at in terms of that shared knowledge base. So he could be talking to them about calculus and long division and some really complex maths problems, and these kids at this age are just learning to count. So there may be a mismatch between what he's saying. Even if they hear the words, they might not understand what it is he's saying. But looking at the kind of ways of decreasing the noise, that's where things like the facial expression, the tone of voice, the hand gestures, all of those things can really aid communication and clarify the language that's coming actually out of his mouth. So when you're thinking about creating media for kids with the language, you've done the encoding, because that's the scriptwriter's job, and you've produced the content. But what are you doing to reduce the noise within the environment and to aid the kids decoding? That's something to just think about, or take back to your team and have a think about how as a medium you can do that with your content.
And have you seen any good examples that do that well, Amanda, that you would point people towards? Like, this show did it well, this show didn't do it well, like in your experience?
So it depends on the age of the kids.
Yeah.
Because there are some shows that are really good I mean, things like some of the like Teletubbies, Twirly-woos, In the Night Garden, those sort of things. They, for pre-verbal kids,
Right.
they're very good at sort of the very basic stuff. And I'm
Like
going to use it as an
overhearing.
example for second language learning, but Dora the Explorer did it really well. There's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of visual, you know, let's go here kind of thing. And there was the same. So the kids learned the routines, very much like you were saying about your kids with the music. They learnt the songs and they played them over and over again, and they sang them over and over again. And that's a really good way of just, you know, consolidating that learning in the brain. So repetition is key, especially for preschoolers.
And like Blue's Clues, I think, is another one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, really good. Yeah. And I think, you know, there's I've got several examples, I think, of sort of really good preschool. Blue's Clues was one. Dora was another, and I think Barney might have been one.
That's a while ago now, but they're bringing Dora back, which is really good news.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
one of my favorites was Ada Twist, which, you know, really, in my opinion, you know, tried to get more into science, which, you know, as a parent I loved, and just I think wonder if how much noise that had within that show, you know. Because it's dealing with things that are not in your common shows, you know what I mean, your everyday. So interesting.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I'm just trying to think of other ones that are not just UK focused, that sort of travel internationally. But I think there's some good examples. But it's not just about the words that are coming out; it's also about the non-verbal cues as well. So if you look at non-verbal communication, you've got the obvious one, which is the sign language. Can I get the next slide? I think we're ready for that. There we go. So yes, you've got actions and gestures, and there's an increase in Makaton and early sign languages to give kids who haven't got the fine motor control over their mouth and lips and tongue yet the ability to, you know, say thank you and ask for a drink and communicate effectively. So non-verbal communication is really powerful, especially with very young children, because it's a very blunt instrument in at that age. With the Makaton, it's very much a sort of instructional, I want a drink, I'm hungry, please, thank you, those kind of things. But it's still that serve and return, and it's still that an important part of language development. So it's something that we can look at. And certainly in the UK, we have Mr. Tumble, which is an inclusive show that's aimed at children. It's aimed at all children, but it's particularly relevant for kids with additional needs. And he does the whole Makaton signing, and it's incredibly powerful. So bringing that into the show can be effective. You've also got visual aids. Like I said, if you're creating video content for kids, you've got the call out, the sort of the comic, the pow, the big star that, when kids, I know something happens and there's an explosion, or there's a dramatic sound effects that you can put in, and creating that the communication through that, because you don't have facial expressions, you don't have that immediate feedback, so you have to almost overemphasize some of the visual cues to help support that language communications channel. So it's looking at it as a round. Very different if you are creating an audiobook, for example, because the only thing you have there is the tone of voice and the volume, and then it's all about the words and the language chosen. Whereas when you've got visual media as well, you've got a lot more opportunities to really help enrich the language. So you probably can help children access more complex language because you've got the visual cues to support it. So
there's also this new research that's saying podcasts, that you were talking about noise, with podcasts, kids listen more. I mean, that sounds ironic, right? Because it's a podcast, but they're actually more attentive to what they're hearing, because it's all coming through their ears, you know what I mean? And it's just an interesting, I've been doing a lot of work on podcasts. I think it's really super interesting to see how these different mediums tap into different sensors, where when you're looking at something, especially, I know my kids are older, but kids tend to duo, right? Like they're on a phone and they're watching a show, or they're on a computer and they've got their, you know what I mean? So like trying to figure out how best to capture attention through one medium, and do it powerfully is a hard job these days. So it's something that we all have to really think about.
Yeah, and I think when I'm giving advice to parents on that is if you are, if you are on a car journey or whatever, and you're listening to a podcast or an audiobook together, get the kids to put their phones down, get them to not be doing something else, because then you do properly listen and you engage it. And I think there's difference between that and something on in the background that some music or whatever is on in the background that you're not really paying attention to, but you might scan listen, and then when your ears prick up when you find something or see something interesting whilst you're doing something else. So I think there's pros and cons for both, but absolutely being able to give children or the opportunity to focus their entire attention on one channel is really powerful.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I feel, because I just feel like today's kids are very distracted. I think Gen Alpha, we've been studying them at CMA for a while now, and we just put out our report, and they're actually, I think, the generation that's going to come in, bring it back around and want to put down their phone and want to have these unique experiences, especially since they all got locked up for 2 years because of COVID. They want more world experiences than any other generation at this point in their life cycle. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they impact things. And I think that's something as media makers we need to think about too. So.
Yeah, and the rise of that sort of immersive experience, the sort of multimedia immersive experiences where you are, whether it's a VR thing or whether it's an event that you go to and it's just kind of all consuming. I think that's really interesting as well, because it blocks out the noise. You are in there and you're engrossed, and you don't really have an option. So I think that's a really interesting development. It'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Well, and it's usually family or family and friends, and so it's like the whole group experience too, versus the one with a piece of media. The one to media ratio, which I think is good too. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and certainly for language learning, it's social, so that you can communicate together, you can share the experience, you can relate to each other. That's all, really good, really good for kids. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is the role of language for children who don't speak English or who are using it for a second language learning, because I think this is where it's got a really important role. And as a Brit who is fairly horrible at other languages, I give Italian a go, but I'm fairly terrible because I just expect everybody to be able to speak English. It's humbling to see how many languages some people can speak and how fluently they speak it. And I think being able to look at second language learning and being able to figure out how to promote, the vast majority of kids' entertainment content is delivered in English. And if it's either used because that's our first language. So if you're then doing something in Spanish or Chinese or any other language, how does that help native English speakers learn another language? But equally importantly, how does it help children who are brought up with English not as their native language? How does it help them engage with that English language learning? So and it's not just about being able to go on holiday and order off a menu. If we can get those language learnings, it's really good for your brain to learn a second language. So if we can get that done earlier in kids' lives, so the earlier the better, really, we can it helps with the neuronal connections, the parts of the brain that are associated with language learning fire up more readily, and it helps you learn association. So it's really, really important. I think we're a couple of slides behind maybe now. There we go. So just being able to introduce language and sounds. So the example that is, I think, most often studied is the Japanese struggle with the L and the R sound in the English language because they haven't been exposed to it, and because the same part of their brain is processing those two sounds. And it's the same with certainly the sort of some of the Spanish sounds that when I'm trying to say something correctly in Spanish, there's some sounds that my brain just won't let me make, because I haven't grown up listening to them, and I don't distinguish them from the English language sounds. So I think it's really beneficial to children for them to be exposed to as wide a range of language sounds as possible from around the world, so that at the point at which they want to learn to another language, their brain's ready for it. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And I think as I'm assuming, because I'm delivering this in the English language, everybody listening is speaking English, but I think we need to make sure that we're not that whole sort of, we're all English speakers, therefore the rest of the world needs to keep up. I think we can be really inclusive by giving kids content, an international language base, so that children can hear different language sounds and can be much more open to learning them, because if you don't do it when the kids are young, it becomes increasingly difficult.
No, I agree. And like to what you were saying about the Spanish language too, like, and going back to your chart of how you learn to speak, there's certain ways that words are formed in other languages that if you're not exposed to them, or you don't get that ability to learn those languages at a younger age, it is harder as an adult to literally manipulate your mouth to get them correct. And I think I'm fortunate that I grew up in England and have traveled quite a lot and experienced a lot of different languages, but I don't think a lot of people have that exposure. So if we can bring that to them through different forms of media, I think that's really powerful to globalize content. From working at Netflix, that's something that was a massive initiative for us to have regional content, so that everyone had that experience to learn and to grow through their own language, as well as get experience with others across the platform. So yeah, I think it's a big initiative for a lot of people in kids media to create that kind of bilingual, multilingual versions. And I think it's one thing that, again, I openly admit, I used to work at Netflix. They do really well, the localization of content. They spend a lot of time and work diligently to make it authentic. And I think that's really important as well, that when you are dubbing something or recreating it in another language, that you do it authentically with the people from that region, so that kids can hear it appropriately in the right way. So yeah, all for that. I think language is key, as you said, and I know you're going to get to this because I've seen the whole day, how the brain develops too is really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we're not expecting the media industry to be able to teach children, 20 different languages, but by introducing those early sounds from a wider range of languages, you're just opening up the opportunity for them to learn at a later date if they want to, or to explore that in more depth. So I think it's a really powerful thing. Yeah, so I think that's great. So if we move on to the neuroanatomy of language, just a sort of a basic 101. Here's a odd picture of a brain that looks a cartoon picture of a brain. Let's go with it. So the two key areas of language, and obviously the brain has lots of connections between lots of different areas and everything, but you've got Broca's area, which is usually in the left hemisphere, and that's used to express language. So if you think back to the slide where you had the dad and the kids, and he was encoding and they were decoding. So when he was encoding and he was thinking about what he wanted to say, Broca's area was going crazy, and it was forming the words that then came out of his mouth. The kids, they were using Wernicke's area. They were using that to decode. Now, when you have language difficulties, so anomia or those kind of word blindness, those kind of things, that's normally because there's some disruption in the connections between Broca's area and Wernicke's area. So making sure that children have as much opportunity to listen and then produce language is how to keep those areas really well connected. Because if you're sitting there, and this comes back to the interactivity of language, if you're sitting there and you're hearing, this is a conversation I have with teachers all the time. If you're hearing, you're only activating Wernicke's area. So you are receiving it all, but if you don't then form the connection to Broca's area and get a chance to express it yourself, that those connections are weaker and more likely to be disrupted. So there's a two-way street when it comes to language, and the stronger the connections there, the easier the connections are between things like the visual cortex and the auditory cortex. So the whole thing becomes, if you use it more, it becomes richer and much more effective. So making sure that we are supporting children, all aspects of children's language, from the listening and the receiving it to the using it and expressing it themselves, is absolutely key. So when you're thinking about content, think about not just delivering language to the kids, but how they can then use it, and encouraging them to do stuff offline is a really powerful way to sort of reinforce the language development that they've experienced through the media that you've given them.
Well, and I think that echoes the fundamentals to education, right? That it's not regurgitation, it's application. So you hear something, you process it, you put it into your world, and can re-express it and learn from it, apply it to different parts of your life. I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, and playtime is, the sort of the screen time versus playtime argument. Next slide, please, Eva. Thanks. Is that sort of interaction of balancing that. I mean, those of you who've heard my previous talks will know about the balanced play diet and the whole, balancing that screen time and playtime. But actually, if we can get screen time to be a prompt and a motivator for playtime, then you're really doing a good job, because actually that's where the magic really happens. And if you've got, let's use Dora again, if you've got kids, my two were big Dora fans when they were little, they're putting on their backpack and they're going out and they're going, swipe or don't swipe and all of that kind of stuff, and they're going out and they're having their adventures, and they get out the map to go left or right. They're bringing the language that they've learned and they are applying it to their play. So that's where I think screen time and kids media shouldn't be an end in itself. It should be the springboard for children's imaginations and their playtime and everything. So
I have to tell you, and people that know me know this, so it's embarrassing that I'm going to share it once again, but my daughter loved geocaching. If you don't know what that is, it's where you have this app and you find where a piece of treasure is, and then you go out into the world with your child and you use, maths to figure out where to go, and then they have to track it, and then they leave a little message inside for the next person. It's so community based. It just, again, it's that wonderful form of media that creates an experience with your child that, I have one that's 20 and one that's 15, and they still talk about it, so it was obviously something that was really fun for us. And who doesn't like a good treasure hunt? You know what I mean? So it's just having that ability to pull the child, especially today, into the world and extend that experience will make your child, or make the child, more affectionate and as we say, a brand advocate for that content, because they had such a good experience and they'll want to do it again and again. And leaning into those kind of principles is really fun, I think, as well.
So you only have to look at the success of something like Pokemon Go to realize how powerful that kind of thing can be. Absolutely. So that play learning connection is really important. Can I have the next slide, please, Eva? It's like we were talking about, it's such a social activity that play is part of language development, and language development is part of play. So making sure that you've got that sort of symbiotic relationship, and it's nurturing the language use, because you're giving children opportunity to use their language as well as to receive it. Really, really important. So I think taking the sort of children's media in isolation is too short-sighted. I think what we're looking at is for a brand or for a content or for a character to really come alive in children's life and be part of their play, and so that you can produce that learning for them, and that they engage with it, because children learn most from the people that they're most closely attached to. So if they are attached to a character in a story or a brand, they are much more likely to be open to the learning and the educational value that is embedded in that content. So it's really, really powerful.
I
The
totally agree.
next slide, please. So yeah, so instead of thinking about just creating a kid's video, animation or whatever, think about what else that can do. And for those of you in the licensing industry, this is music to your ears, because whilst you don't necessarily want to go down the Disney route of only producing content with product placement in mind, being able to look at how your characters, your storyline, the setting that you have created for this piece of content can be extrapolated out, that's really powerful. And understanding whether it should be arts and craft activities, or whether it should be storytelling, or whether it should be outdoor adventures, whatever it is, you can make products and develop your licensing program to really fit authentically with the content in the media that you've originally produced. So being able to curate that.
Extend the experience, like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's and developing more of a brand loyalty to your original content as well. So it's that all, when it works well, a sort of a solid licensing program that's well thought through and well researched is really powerful.
I agree. And I think that offline interaction makes the difference between a show and the beginnings of a franchise. And that's really where people can focus that energy, figuring out what are those additional touch points, additional forms of media, additional storytelling elements that can take more of a journey versus just a simple sit in front of a screen and watch something. So
100%, absolutely. And you teed up really nicely there about the sort of the parents and caregivers as well, because being able to create that more immersive experience is something that will help parents feel good about it too, because if parents are still worried about how much time kids are spending on screens, but if they can interact with the content through a colouring book or through some outdoor adventures or arts and craft, whatever it is, they will feel better about the brand. And if you've got the parent buy-in, then you've got half of the battle is already won. So
yeah.
If we can move on the next slide, the empowering the parents and caregivers with your content, so explaining why it's educationally beneficial or developmentally relevant, and what it is that parents and carers can do. The amount of parents I get going, I don't know how to play with my kids. What should I do with this? They really like, I know, Paw Patrol or Peppa Pig or whatever it is, but what am I supposed to do to help them? And parents are desperate for guidance on some of this stuff. So if there is a piece of content that is popular with the kids, giving parents support on how to engage with it, how to set screen time boundaries, how to take it offline and bring it into everyday activities, even things like cutting sandwiches into the shape of their favorite character or something out there, those kind of really easy activities that parents can do at home, but a lot of parents lack the confidence to do that on their own, and they will really welcome support from brands who do that and content providers who do that for them. So the kind of the parents area on the BBC over here does it really well. That kind of, they've got CBBC for the older kids, and then they have the kind of for grown-up section, and there's so much resources there for parents to be able to support their kids' learning, but also take it a bit further and help them feel good as parents. And that again all adds to the positive feeling that they get about the content and the brand. So I think it's really it's a real opportunity for content creators to support parents and engage with the parents, as well as helping them feel like they're doing a good job, because we're all parents. I mean, anybody who's a parent will have days where they're wondering whether they've got it right or not. And
I think
that.
Sorry, Amanda. I was just going to say, and I think that's equally important, if not on some topics like bullying, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of those topics that are now in kids' content, you know what I mean? And giving the parents the best way to talk to their child about those topics. And parents do feel lost. They don't know the right way to do it. And there's been, you know, so much discussion about doing it the wrong way. I think, you know, in some ways parents are a little you know, shy to attack those topics. And I think the shows that can offer, to your point, the additional resources for parents to feel comfortable and to engage and have those conversations, you know, really help the child and the family as a unit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the first things you can do is create content that is co-viewing appropriate.
Yeah.
I mean, you get things, I know Shrek worked on loads of different levels. Bluey, I think, has its own adult fan group now and stuff. So it is possible to have shows that kids really, really love, but that the adults can enjoy watching and get a lot out of too.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make them think, oh, here we go again. We're watching Cinderella for the 50th time. You know, it's because kids will want to watch the same thing over and over again. So actually having that opportunity and encouraging that co-viewing is really good for the kids, because then you've got that sort of interactivity off the screen so they can talk about it afterwards. It's a really good attachment thing for parents. So, you know, your shared memories, shared moments, that's really great. It keeps that as kids get older, if you're co-viewing, it keeps those conversations going. So it's those really nice touch points. So it's really good for families and children's mental well-being to have content that they watch as a family, and then encouraging parents to do that and creating content that is really good co-viewing content, I think, is one of the best things we could do. And I don't see as much of that as I would like to, if I'm honest.
I agree. Bluey's such a good example.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Of everyday life made, you know, hilarious and fun and beautiful. Like it's yeah. Our whole family likes Bluey, and we do not have little kids in our house anymore.
Absolutely. So then just moving on to the summary, because I'm conscious of time and I do want to leave time for a few questions if anybody has any. So making sure that the content is relevant to kids' developmental stage is really important. So, you know, Teletubbies for pre-verbal kids, absolutely great. Teletubbies for 5-year-olds is going to hinder language development, not help it. So, you know, making sure you've got that, promoting that interactivity, socializing, language, you know, all of that sort of stuff through that playful approach. And supporting language through childhood, not just stopping at preschool. So helping kids develop their vocab, develop their communication skills, learning to sort of debate and argue and convince and entertain and perform, all of that stuff's really good. And let's not forget the parents, because if we can get the parents on board, they will be our biggest advocates. So I think that's all really important.
Such a good talk. Okay, we have one question from Kendra. Since different words can mean different things in different cultures, how do you navigate using these words but still keeping an international appeal?
Oh, really good question. Thanks, Kendra. I think my advice there, and when we've been working with app developers who are looking at sort of making globally relevant apps, is to use the visual cues a lot. So if you're not going to localize for a particular market, try and avoid language, you know, culturally specific terms, but use when needed, use that sort of visual aids to smooth the communication. So for those of you who have watched the other sessions, you'll know that I always leave with a takeaway, because it's lovely to get the feedback from the sessions. That I'm hoping you've enjoyed it, but I know that you'll go about your daily life and carry on and do your thing. So Eva, can we move to the very last slide where I give everybody a bit of a challenge? So I would like you to think about something that you've heard in the last hour or so that has made you think differently, maybe about your job. It could maybe it makes you think differently about your young kids at home if it's a personal thing. But what is it that you've heard, and what has it made you think about, and what are you going to do about it? And as a psychologist, I know that if you write this down and you put a date on it, you are much more likely to achieve it. And I like to think of people going away from these talks with an action point. And I would love to hear how you get on. And the other thing to acknowledge here is that it's okay to need help from somebody to do whatever it is you're wanting to do. So if you do, write that down. What help do you need, and who are you going to ask for help from? Because we're all in this together. So if we can build a team who are making a difference to kids' language development, then, and however many people have been listening to this can go away and do that, then the world just got a little bit better for kids, and that makes me feel nice. So if you can take your takeaways away and then either reach out to me on LinkedIn or put something on the CMA chat, then yeah, we'd love to hear how you get on with it.
Yeah, I would totally echo that. I think that Amanda always shares such rich information, and for me, very thought-provoking. Sometimes, Amanda, I do need to sit with it for a moment to be able to fill out your last slide, but you do get me definitely thinking about things differently. And, as I go about my world, creating media, for me, it's always been about the connectivity, but listening to you today talk about these different stages of language and how to inject that knowledge into media development is having me, think differently about some of the things that we're working on. So I love it. All right. Then I think that I will thank you once again for your time. It was, as always, lovely to talk to you. I'm glad I got to do this one. And we will be back with one more for this year, hopefully in November or early December. And we'll talk about, do you want to share a little snippet about the toy evaluation process and everything that you do so we can tease that one out?
Sure. So for those of you who know me, we run Fundamentally Children, which is the research consultancy, and then we also have Good Play Guide. So goodplayguide.com is a review site for toys, apps, games, educational content, educational products, and baby products, and anything to do with kids, really. So we pride ourselves on being an accreditation rather than an award. So we have a robust methodology, and it means that we have a lot of faith in the products that have been accredited, and we're happy to shout about them. So before Christmas, I'm gonna share with you guys how we go about that, how we do the research, how we check what makes a good toy, and just in time for the holidays.
Yeah, I know. I think it's gonna be perfect. I can't wait. All right. So thank you to everyone that joined us this morning. We appreciate your time as always. And feel free, as Amanda said, to reach out to her or reach out to us with any questions and follow up from there. Otherwise, we will see you in a month with Dr. Amanda Guma again. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.